They believed they were protecting one of the most exclusive clubs in America. They had no idea they had just locked out the woman who could decide whether it survived another year. The wrought iron gates of the Blackstone Heritage Club gleamed beneath the warm afternoon sun, casting long shadows across the polished stone driveway. Beyond them stretched emerald lawns, marble fountains, and a stately clubhouse where America's wealthiest executives, politicians, and financiers gathered behind closed doors. Membership wasn't simply purchased, it was inherited, earned, or quietly granted among the nation's most influential circles. At precisely 4 o'clock, a modest silver sedan rolled toward the entrance. The vehicle looked strangely ordinary among the line of imported luxury cars waiting beyond the gates. It drew a few curious glances before returning attention to more familiar displays of wealth. Emily Carter stepped out with calm, measured movements. 25 years old, with shoulder-length blonde hair tucked neatly behind one ear, she wore a simple ivory blouse beneath a light gray blazer, dark slacks, and comfortable flats. No designer logos decorated her clothes. No jewelry flashed beneath the sunlight except for a slim silver watch and a plain wedding band she wore on her right hand out of habit after losing her mother years earlier. To nearly everyone watching, she looked like an assistant running an errand rather than someone invited into one of the country's most private institutions. She adjusted the leather folder beneath her arm before walking toward the entrance with quiet confidence. Inside the security booth, guard Michael Turner barely looked up from his monitor before his eyes settled on Emily's modest appearance. His expression shifted almost instantly. "Afternoon," he said without warmth. "Members only." Emily smiled politely. "I have a scheduled meeting in the Founder Hall at 4:30. Michael extended his hand. "Membership card." "I wasn't issued one. My host arranged guest clearance." He typed lazily for only a few seconds before leaning back. "Nothing's coming up." Emily remained composed. "Would you mind checking under Emily Carter? The reservation may be listed by name." Michael sighed loudly enough for nearby valet attendants to hear. "We already checked." Behind Emily, another luxury SUV approached the gate. The guard immediately straightened, his stern face transforming into an enthusiastic smile as he waved the driver through without asking another question. Emily noticed the contrast, but said nothing. "I don't mind waiting while you verify," she offered gently. "There isn't anything to verify." His voice grew sharper. "If your name isn't on my screen, you don't go inside." A hush lingered between them. Around the circular driveway, several club members carrying golf bags slowed their pace. Quiet conversations drifted through the afternoon air as curious eyes settled on the young woman standing calmly outside the gate. Some exchanged knowing smiles. Others barely concealed their amusement. One elderly member whispered loudly enough for several people to hear. "They really need stricter screening these days." Soft laughter followed. Emily lowered her eyes for a brief moment, taking a slow breath before lifting them again. There was no anger in her expression, no embarrassment either, only remarkable patience. Far above the entrance, the American flag fluttered gently against a cloudless sky. None of the people watching realized that, inside the leather folder Emily carried so casually, rested documents capable of changing the future of Blackstone Heritage Club forever. And within the next hour, every person standing behind those gates would wish they had simply asked one more question. The first whispers were almost harmless. That was what made them so dangerous. Emily Carter remained standing outside the wrought iron gates, the afternoon breeze gently stirring a loose strand of blonde hair across her cheek. Behind her calm expression, there was no trace of frustration. She simply glanced at the elegant bronze clock mounted above the clubhouse entrance. For 12. She still had 18 minutes before the scheduled meeting. Inside the club, crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble floors where men in tailored suits discussed mergers over aged whiskey while women in designer dresses exchanged polite laughter. Every detail reflected exclusivity. Every corner reminded visitors that privilege was expected, not questioned. Outside, Emily waited alone. A young valet named Ethan quietly approached her. "I'm sorry about this, ma'am," he said, lowering his voice. "Sometimes they're particular." Emily offered a gentle smile. "Thank you. You're being kind." Before Ethan could answer, another voice interrupted. "Is there still a problem here?" Nathan Brooks descended the wide stone staircase with deliberate confidence. At 58, the chairman of Blackstone Heritage Club carried himself like a man who had spent decades deciding who belonged in rooms others could only dream of entering. His navy blazer bore the club's gold crest, and the silver cufflinks at his wrists caught the afternoon light as several members instinctively stepped aside to let him pass. Michael straightened immediately. "Mr. Brooks." Nathan barely acknowledged him. His attention settled entirely on Emily. "I understand you've been insisting you have an appointment." Emily nodded politely. "Yes, sir." "And your sponsor?" "I believe he'll introduce himself once I arrive." Nathan's eyebrows lifted with restrained amusement. "How convenient." Several nearby members chuckled softly. Emily kept her voice even. "I was invited to attend a private meeting in Founder Hall." Nathan folded his arms. "Founder Hall hosts only board-level discussions." "I understand. And yet you expect us to believe someone invited you." "I don't expect you to believe anything," Emily replied quietly. "I'm simply asking that someone verify the reservation." For a brief moment, silence settled across the entrance. Nathan studied her face as though searching for nervousness. He found none. That irritated him more than he cared to admit. "We've built this institution over generations," he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Do you know why people respect Blackstone?" Emily listened without interrupting. "Because standards matter." He gestured toward the clubhouse. "We don't allow anyone to walk through those doors simply because they claim to have business inside." Several members nodded approvingly. One woman murmured, "Exactly." Nathan looked back at Emily. "I suggest you save yourself further embarrassment." The words hung in the warm afternoon air. Emily slowly adjusted the leather folder beneath her arm. "I have no intention of embarrassing anyone." A few people laughed openly. Nathan smiled for the first time. "I'm afraid that's already happened." More members had gathered now. Conversations on the terrace had stopped. Golf carts stood abandoned near the pathway as curiosity spread through the grounds faster than any official announcement. Every pair of eyes rested on the young woman in the gray blazer. No one noticed that she never once attempted to defend her status. No one wondered why someone supposedly desperate to get inside seemed perfectly willing to wait. Nathan finally turned toward security. "If Ms. Carter refuses to leave, please escort her off the property." The sentence landed with quiet finality. Michael hesitated. Ethan looked away. Emily remained motionless. Instead of arguing, she calmly reached into her blazer pocket, removed her phone, and looked at the screen for a brief second. Then she pressed a single contact. When the call connected, she spoke only one sentence. "I don't think today's partnership meeting will be necessary after all." She ended the call before anyone could ask another question. Around her, amused smiles slowly returned. None of them realized that somewhere less than 10 minutes away, several black SUVs had already changed direction toward Blackstone Heritage Club. There is a peculiar silence that arrives just before powerful people realize they have made an irreversible mistake. At Blackstone Heritage Club, that silence had not yet come. Confidence still ruled the courtyard. Nathan Brooks watched Emily Carter lower her phone into her blazer pocket with faint amusement. Whatever call she had just made clearly failed to impress him. To his eyes, she was simply another determined outsider refusing to accept rejection. "Finished?" he asked with a thin smile. Emily met his gaze. "Yes. I hope whoever you called can explain that private clubs don't change their policies for unverified visitors." "I wasn't asking anyone to change your policies." Nathan folded his hands behind his back. "Then we're done here." He nodded toward Michael. "Escort Miss Carter beyond the front gates." Michael hesitated only briefly before stepping forward. "I'm sorry, ma'am." Emily offered him another gentle smile. "You've been respectful." "Thank you." The words caught Michael off guard. Most people in her situation would have argued, shouted, or threatened legal action. She did none of those things. Instead, she gathered her leather folder and calmly walked toward the sidewalk outside the property. Behind her, scattered laughter drifted across the entrance. One member shook his head. "People will do anything to get inside nowadays." Another replied, "Probably hoping to meet someone wealthy." Nathan accepted several approving nods from nearby members. To them, he had protected the club's standards once again. Inside the clubhouse, however, events were unfolding very differently. In the Founder Hall, 12 executives sat around a polished walnut table waiting for the afternoon's most important meeting of the year. Crystal water glasses remained untouched. Presentation screens displayed a single title: Strategic Partnership Initiative. At the head of the table, Club President Harold Bennett glanced at his watch for the third time. "Has anyone heard from our guest?" An assistant checked her tablet. "No, sir. She confirmed attendance this morning." Another board member frowned. "She has an exceptional reputation for punctuality." Harold nodded slowly. "I've heard the same." The room grew increasingly uneasy. The partnership under discussion wasn't merely another sponsorship agreement. Blackstone had quietly struggled with declining membership, soaring maintenance costs, and aging facilities for several years. Today's meeting represented an opportunity to secure a transformative investment capable of modernizing the entire institution without sacrificing its heritage. Failure wasn't something the board wanted to consider. Outside, Emily stopped beneath an old oak tree overlooking the entrance. She placed the leather folder on a nearby stone bench and quietly admired the magnificent clubhouse standing beyond the gates. It truly was beautiful. Its architecture reflected generations of history. Its people, however, had revealed something far less impressive. Ethan approached cautiously, carrying a bottle of water. "I thought you might need this." Emily accepted it with genuine gratitude. "Thank you." He shifted awkwardly. "I don't know why, but I feel like something about today isn't right." Emily looked toward the grand entrance where Nathan continued greeting arriving members as though nothing unusual had happened. "Sometimes," she said softly, "people become so busy protecting a reputation that they forget the values that created it." Ethan frowned, thinking about her words. Before he could respond, a distant sound echoed across the quiet afternoon. Engines. Not one. Several. Heads turned almost instinctively toward the long private road leading into the estate. Nathan paused in mid-conversation. Michael narrowed his eyes. Even the golfers stopped walking. Far beyond the entrance gates, a procession of identical black SUVs appeared around the bend, moving in perfect formation beneath the towering maple trees. No club event had scheduled their arrival. No member recognized the convoy. Yet every vehicle carried the same destination. And every mile they traveled brought Blackstone Heritage Club one step closer to discovering exactly who Emily Carter really was. Power rarely announces itself with noise. Sometimes it arrives so quietly that people don't recognize it until it is already standing in front of them. The convoy rolled steadily through the tree-lined entrance road, 6 identical black SUVs moving with practiced precision. Their polished exteriors reflected the late afternoon sunlight as they approached the security gate without slowing. Conversations across the courtyard faded. Golf clubs rested motionless against shoulders. Even the fountain seemed quieter. Nathan Brooks narrowed his eyes. "Who's scheduled to arrive?" he asked. Michael glanced at the visitor log. "No one, sir." The lead vehicle stopped at the gate. A sharply dressed woman stepped out from the passenger seat, holding a leather portfolio against her navy suit. Before Michael could ask for identification, she presented a discreet security credential. "We're here for the 4:30 partnership meeting." Michael quickly opened the gate. "Of course. Welcome." The convoy entered without another question. Nathan adjusted his jacket, immediately replacing his earlier confidence with polished hospitality. "Looks like our investors have finally arrived." Several club members smiled with visible relief. Inside Founder Hall, Harold Bennett stood as the assistant hurried into the room. "They're here." A collective sigh swept across the table. "Excellent," Harold said. "Please escort them inside immediately." Outside, however, something unexpected happened. Instead of driving toward the clubhouse entrance, every SUV came to a smooth stop near the old oak tree where Emily Carter remained seated on the stone bench. Doors opened almost simultaneously. 8 executives emerged. Men and women in impeccably tailored business attire walked with calm purpose across the driveway. Nobody spoke. Nobody looked toward the clubhouse. They walked directly toward Emily. Nathan's welcoming smile slowly disappeared. "What are they doing?" The question lingered unanswered. Emily stood as the group approached. The woman carrying the portfolio reached her first. "I'm terribly sorry we're late, Miss Carter." Emily smiled warmly. "No apology necessary, Victoria. We encountered unexpected traffic." "I imagine I did as well." A faint smile crossed Victoria's face as she understood the remark. Behind her, the remaining executives greeted Emily with quiet respect. One shook her hand. Another nodded. A third simply said, "Good afternoon, Chief Executive." Those two words drifted across the courtyard like a sudden change in the weather. Chief Executive. Michael's face lost its color. Ethan stared in disbelief. Nathan blinked once, convinced he had misunderstood. Harold Bennett emerged from the clubhouse entrance just in time to witness the gathering beneath the oak tree. He froze. His eyes moved from the convoy, to the executives, to Emily. Then recognition struck him. Oh no. Without another thought, Harold hurried down the marble staircase, abandoning every ounce of presidential composure. Nathan intercepted him halfway. "Harold, what's going on?" Harold barely slowed. "You stopped her?" Nathan frowned. "She wasn't on the guest list." Harold looked at him with genuine horror. "She doesn't belong on the guest list." Nathan stared back, confused. Harold's voice fell to little more than a whisper. "She's the reason we have a meeting." Around them, club members exchanged uncertain glances. Nobody laughed anymore. Harold finally reached Emily and extended both hands. "Ms. Carter, please accept my sincerest apologies for this unacceptable welcome." Emily shook his hand politely. "Good afternoon, Mr. Bennett." Harold looked visibly shaken. "We've been expecting you for weeks." "I know." Nathan slowly approached, struggling to understand what he was seeing. Victoria turned toward him. Her expression remained professional. "I don't believe we've met." Nathan forced a smile. "Nathan Brooks, chairman of Blackstone Heritage Club." Victoria nodded once. "I'm Victoria Reynolds, chief legal officer of Carter Global Holdings." She paused just long enough for every word to settle over the silent courtyard. "And this is our chief executive officer, Ms. Emily Carter." No one spoke. The breeze carried nothing but the soft rustling of oak leaves overhead. For the first time that afternoon, the gates of Blackstone Heritage Club stood wide open. Yet every person inside suddenly felt as though the ground beneath them had quietly disappeared. Respect can be offered in a single moment, yet losing it can take only a single sentence. Nathan Brooks was about to discover that some mistakes cannot be withdrawn once the truth arrives. The silence outside Blackstone Heritage Club felt heavier than the marble columns surrounding the entrance. Nathan stared at Emily Carter as though the words he had just heard refused to make sense. Chief Executive Officer. The title echoed through his mind, colliding with every assumption he had made during the past 20 minutes. He forced a courteous smile. There must be some misunderstanding. Victoria Reynolds calmly opened her leather portfolio. "There isn't." She removed a presentation folder embossed with the silver emblem of Carter Global Holdings and handed it to Harold Bennett. Harold's hands trembled slightly as he recognized the logo. He had spent months negotiating for this meeting. The proposed partnership represented nearly $200 million in long-term investments, enough to renovate the aging clubhouse, restore its historic golf course, modernize its facilities, and secure Blackstone's future for decades. Everything depended on one signature. Emily's. Around the courtyard, members exchanged uneasy glances. The same people who had laughed only moments earlier suddenly avoided looking directly at her. Nathan finally found his voice. "Ms. Carter, if we had known," Emily gently interrupted. "Would anything have happened differently?" The question was soft, almost impossible to hear, yet it silenced everyone. Nathan opened his mouth. Nothing came out, because he already knew the answer. Yes, everything would have been different. Harold stepped forward immediately. "Ms. Carter, please allow me to personally welcome you inside." Emily looked toward the towering entrance doors. "They're beautiful." Harold nodded uncertainly. "We're very proud of this place." "I can see why." She paused before continuing. "I only wish the welcome had reflected the building. No accusation, no raised voice, only quiet disappointment." Those words landed harder than any public confrontation. Michael lowered his head. Ethan shifted uncomfortably beside the gate. Even several longtime members looked embarrassed by what they had witnessed. Harold turned sharply toward Nathan. "What exactly happened here?" Nathan struggled to explain. "We followed protocol." Emily answered before he could continue. "The staff requested identification." She looked briefly toward Michael. He remained professional. Michael looked up in surprise. Emily continued. "I explained that I had a scheduled meeting." She then turned toward Nathan. "The decision changed after assumptions were made. No exaggeration. No insults. Just facts." Harold understood immediately. His shoulders dropped. "I sincerely apologize." Emily smiled politely. "I believe you." Mean that. Victoria quietly added. Unfortunately, intentions don't erase first impressions. No one challenged her. Harold took a slow breath. The board is already assembled. They're waiting for you. Emily glanced at her watch. For 32. They've been waiting for quite some time. We certainly have. For a brief moment, Emily looked back toward the entrance gate where she had first arrived. The old oak tree cast long shadows across the stone path. Only 20 minutes earlier she had stood there alone while strangers judged her without asking a single meaningful question. Now those same strangers stepped aside without being asked. The pathway opened, not because she had changed, because their perception had. Emily gathered her leather folder. I came here hoping to discuss the future of this club. She looked around at the silent faces surrounding her. Now I'm equally interested in discussing its values. Without another word, she walked toward the grand entrance. Victoria and the executive team followed. Harold hurried beside them. Nathan remained several steps behind. For the first time in many years, the chairman of Blackstone Heritage Club understood what it felt like to enter his own building as the least important person in the room. The most painful consequences are not delivered by anger. They arrive when the truth quietly takes a seat at the head of the table. Founder Hall had never felt so silent. The long walnut conference table reflected the afternoon light pouring through towering windows. Crystal glasses remained untouched. Leather chairs surrounded a room built to host presidents, billionaires, and industry leaders. Today, every eye followed Emily Carter. Harold Bennett personally pulled back the chair reserved at the head of the table. "Ms. Carter," he said quietly, "please." Emily thanked him with a polite nod before taking her seat. Only then did the others sit. Nathan Brooks remained standing for a brief moment, suddenly uncertain where he belonged. The confidence that had carried him through the courtyard seemed to disappear with every passing second. Victoria Reynolds distributed presentation folders around the table. Our proposal includes a 20-year strategic partnership between Carter Global Holdings and Blackstone Heritage Club. The first slide appeared on the large display. Historic Preservation Initiative. Facility Expansion. Scholarship Foundation. Community Outreach Program. Renewable Infrastructure. Every project represented years of planning. Every budget carried Emily's final approval. Board members exchanged astonished glances as the investment figures appeared one after another. $120 million. $160 million. $200 million. Harold slowly removed his glasses. This would completely transform the club. Victoria nodded. That has always been our intention. Emily quietly added. Not simply the buildings. The room became still again. Harold looked toward her. What do you mean? Emily folded her hands on the table. When our research team began evaluating private institutions across the country, Blackstone quickly became one of our strongest candidates. Several directors smiled. Our history impressed you. It did. Our financial plan. Also impressive. Nathan finally allowed himself a hopeful breath. Then Emily continued. But culture was always the deciding factor. Those words erased every smile in the room. Victoria changed the presentation. A new slide appeared. Evaluation criteria. Leadership. Integrity. Community. Respect. Inclusiveness. No financial metrics occupied the top position. Emily looked around the table. We invest in organizations that understand one simple principle. She paused. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity before anyone knows who they are. Nobody interrupted. Nobody moved. Nathan lowered his eyes. Emily spoke without accusation. When I arrived this afternoon, no one asked about my vision. She looked toward Harold. No one asked about my appointment. Her gaze shifted briefly toward Nathan. They saw ordinary clothes. Silence. They assumed an ordinary person. Another silence. And based on that assumption, a decision was made. The room felt smaller with every sentence. Harold leaned forward. I take full responsibility. Emily gently shook her head. Responsibility belongs to leadership. Her words were calm. If a culture encourages people to judge appearances instead of character, that culture wasn't created in a single afternoon. Nathan closed his eyes for a brief moment. He finally understood that this meeting had stopped being about money. It had become a mirror. Emily reached into her folder and removed the signed partnership agreement. She placed it carefully on the polished table. Every director instinctively leaned forward. Nathan looked at the signature line. Still blank. Emily rested one hand gently upon the document. I came here fully prepared to sign this agreement. No one breathed. Then she looked slowly around the room. But before I decide the future of Blackstone Heritage Club, her steady voice filled the silence. I need to know whether this institution truly wants to change, or whether today's welcome simply revealed who it has been all along. No one answered, because for the first time in the club's long history, $200 million was no longer the most important thing waiting on that table. The strongest apology is not spoken with words. It is revealed by the choices people make when they realize they no longer hold the power. No one around the conference table moved. The unsigned agreement rested beneath Emily Carter's hand like a quiet reminder that every future discussed inside Founder Hall depended entirely on one decision. Harold Bennett slowly rose from his chair. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice steady despite the tension, "you asked whether Blackstone truly wants to change." Emily looked at him without speaking. "I can't erase what happened outside." He paused. "But I can decide what happens next." Harold turned toward Nathan Brooks. "For 31 years you've served this club." Nathan nodded cautiously. "I have. You've protected its traditions." "I've tried." Harold folded his hands. "And today those traditions failed." The sentence landed with unmistakable weight. Nathan lowered his eyes. "No one intended disrespect." Emily answered quietly. "Intentions matter." She allowed a brief silence to pass. "But outcomes matter more." No one disagreed. Harold looked toward the remaining board members. "I'd like the minutes to reflect that today's incident represents a leadership failure, not an individual mistake." Several directors immediately nodded. Another quietly added, "Agreed." Harold continued, "Effective immediately, I propose mandatory hospitality and inclusion training for every employee, every manager, and every board member." One director raised his hand. "I second the motion." Another spoke before Harold could continue. Unanimously. Around the table, every hand was raised. Only Nathan hesitated. He looked around the room. Every face waited for him. Slowly, he lifted his own hand. The motion carried without a single objection. Harold turned back toward Emily. "That is only the beginning." Nathan finally stood. For the first time that afternoon, there was no authority in his posture. No confidence. Only humility. He walked around the conference table until he stood directly across from Emily. "I owe you an apology." Emily remained silent. Nathan took a slow breath. "When I saw you outside, I didn't see a guest." His voice grew quieter. "I didn't even see a person deserving the benefit of a simple conversation." The room listened without interruption. "I saw clothing." He swallowed. "I saw assumptions." Another pause. "And I acted as though those assumptions were facts." Emily watched him carefully. "I spent decades believing I was protecting standards." Nathan's eyes briefly drifted toward the windows overlooking the front gate. "Today I realized I was protecting prejudice without recognizing it." The confession settled over the room like a heavy curtain. No one celebrated it. No one interrupted it. Emily finally spoke. "The hardest person to confront is usually ourselves." Nathan gave a faint nod. "I understand that now." She reached for the unsigned agreement. Every board member instinctively leaned forward. Emily slowly closed the folder instead of signing it. A ripple of disappointment crossed several faces. Then she smiled. "This document will still be here tomorrow." Harold looked surprised. "You aren't rejecting the partnership?" Emily gently shook her head. "No." Victoria smiled for the first time since arriving. Emily continued, "I've invested my entire career in companies." She looked around the room. "But institutions are different." She rested her hand on the closed folder. "They aren't transformed by signatures." Her eyes settled briefly on Nathan. "They're transformed by people willing to become better than they were yesterday." Nathan's shoulders relaxed. Not because he had been forgiven, because he had finally understood the lesson. Outside the tall windows, evening sunlight washed across Blackstone Heritage Club, turning the marble walls a warm shade of gold. For the first time in many years, the building looked exactly the same. Yet everyone inside understood that if the club survived the future, it would not be because of the money waiting inside Emily Carter's folder. It would be because one quiet woman had refused to let dignity become negotiable. Real change begins the moment people stop asking how much something will cost and start asking what it is worth. Morning sunlight poured through the tall windows of Founder Hall the following day, bathing the polished walnut table in soft golden light. The atmosphere felt completely different from the afternoon before. There were no anxious whispers, no hurried explanations, only quiet anticipation. Emily Carter entered the room wearing the same simple gray blazer she had worn the day before. Nothing about her appearance had changed. Everything else had. Every board member stood before she reached the table, not because protocol required it, because respect now came naturally. Harold Bennett stepped forward with a warm smile. "Welcome back, Miss Carter." Emily shook his hand. "Good morning." Nathan Brooks remained beside the conference table, noticeably quieter than anyone had ever seen him. His confidence had been replaced by something far more difficult to earn: humility. Harold opened the meeting. "Before discussing the partnership, I'd like to report yesterday's actions." A series of photographs appeared on the presentation screen. Employees participating in hospitality workshops, managers attending leadership seminars, reception procedures being rewritten, guest verification policies redesigned, anonymous feedback, systems installed. Victoria Reynolds reviewed each initiative carefully. "You moved quickly." Harold nodded. "We should have moved years ago." Emily listened without interruption. No one attempted to impress her with polished speeches. Instead, they presented measurable actions. The room felt honest. When the presentation ended, Harold looked toward Emily. "I know trust isn't restored overnight." Emily smiled slightly. "No, but it can begin overnight." She nodded once. "Yes." Nathan slowly stood. "I have one final request." I turned toward him. "I'd like permission to personally apologize to every employee who witnessed my behavior yesterday." Silence filled the room. Harold looked surprised. Emily did not. Nathan continued. "Leadership doesn't only apologize upward." His voice remained calm. "It apologizes downward." Several board members lowered their eyes, reflecting on the truth of those words. Emily's expression softened. "I appreciate that." Nathan sat down again. No applause followed. Moments like this didn't need applause. They needed sincerity. Emily finally opened the leather folder that had remained closed the previous afternoon. The unsigned agreement rested inside. She removed a fountain pen. Every person around the table unconsciously leaned forward. Without ceremony, without dramatic speeches, Emily signed her name. The quiet sound of ink meeting paper seemed louder than any celebration. Harold exhaled slowly. A smile spread across Victoria's face. Several directors exchanged relieved glances. Yet Emily gently slid the agreement across the table before speaking. "I hope everyone understands something." The room became still. "This signature isn't a reward." She looked around the table. "It's a commitment." Her gaze settled on Harold. "You committed to changing your culture." Then toward Nathan. "You committed to changing yourself." Finally, toward every director. "And now Carter Global Holdings commits to helping Blackstone become the institution it was always capable of becoming." No one spoke for several seconds. Outside, staff members crossed the courtyard beneath the old oak tree where Emily had stood alone less than 24 hours earlier. The same gates remained at the entrance. The same marble walls surrounded the property. The same people filled its halls. Yet somehow everything looked different. Not because wealth had arrived, because dignity had finally become more valuable than status. And for the first time in Blackstone Heritage Club's long history, every door inside the building seemed to open for exactly the right reason. The greatest victories are never measured by the people we defeat. They are measured by the people we inspire to become better. 6 months later, the front gates of Blackstone Heritage Club looked exactly as they always had. The wrought iron entrance still framed the long, tree-lined driveway. Marble fountains still shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. Elegant cars continued to arrive one after another. Yet anyone who visited regularly sensed that something invisible had changed. Every guest, regardless of appearance, was greeted with the same warm smile. Every visitor was respectfully welcomed before being questioned. Every employee understood that courtesy came before assumptions. The transformation had become part of the club's identity. Near the entrance stood a simple bronze plaque installed without ceremony. It carried only one sentence: "Dignity is the first privilege every person deserves." Most members walked past it without realizing why those words had been chosen. The staff knew. Nathan Brooks knew. Emily Carter certainly knew. Inside the newly restored Founder Hall, the annual Community Leadership Scholarship welcomed its first class of recipients. Students from ordinary families toured the historic building, many stepping inside a place they had once believed was reserved only for society's elite. Emily watched quietly from the back of the room. She had declined every request to place her name on the scholarship. She had refused interviews. She had turned down invitations to become an honorary member. Recognition had never been the reason she came. Harold Bennett approached with 2 cups of coffee. "I had a feeling you'd stand back here." Emily smiled as she accepted one. "It's the best view." Across the room, Ethan, the young valet who had offered her a bottle of water months earlier, now wore the badge of guest relations manager. His confidence had grown, but his kindness remained exactly the same. As another family entered the hall, Ethan stepped forward with a welcoming smile. "We're honored you're here." Emily watched the exchange quietly. Harold noticed. One small moment can change someone's entire future. Emily nodded. "It already has." Near the entrance, Nathan greeted arriving visitors personally. An elderly couple approached wearing simple clothes that contrasted sharply with the elegance surrounding them. Months earlier, Nathan might have overlooked them. Instead, he extended his hand first. "Welcome to Blackstone." The couple smiled with visible relief. Emily observed the moment without saying a word. No apology could have carried more meaning than that single gesture. As the ceremony concluded, students filled the marble corridors with laughter that echoed through a building once defined by exclusivity. The sound felt different. Lighter, warmer, more alive. Emily quietly made her way toward the front entrance. No cameras followed. No audience applauded. She paused briefly beneath the old oak tree where she had once stood alone with nothing more than a leather folder and quiet patience. The afternoon breeze stirred the leaves above her exactly as it had on that unforgettable day. Only this time, the gates opened before she reached them. Not because someone recognized the CEO of Carter Global Holdings. Because the guard greeted every visitor the same way. Michael smiled warmly. "Good afternoon, ma'am." "Welcome." Emily returned the smile. "Thank you." She walked through the open gates and disappeared into the sunlight beyond the long driveway. Behind her stood a club that had preserved more than its history. It had rediscovered its humanity. And on that quiet afternoon, no one remembered Emily Carter simply as the woman who saved Blackstone Heritage Club. They remembered her as the woman who reminded everyone inside that true status is never displayed by wealth, titles, or exclusive doors. It is revealed by how we treat the person standing quietly in front of us before we know who they are. The gates remained open. And so did every heart that had finally learned what dignity truly looks like.